The hidden truth of the Titanic ship. The ship that was never supposed to fail. The RMS Titanic was not just a ship. It was a floating symbol of human pride, ambition, wealth, and blind confidence. When it left Southampton on April 10, 1912, the world believed it was witnessing the birth of the safest vessel ever built. Newspapers called it unsinkable. Engineers praised its advanced watertight compartments. The wealthy treated it as a luxury hotel on water. For the poor, it was a dream ticket to a new life in America. But beneath the polished brass, grand staircases, and champagne dinners, there were warning signs, ignored signals, suspicious decisions, and hidden stories that many historians still debate today. Titanic did not simply sink because of an iceberg. It sank because of human choices, choices that cost more than 1,500 people their lives. From the very beginning, Titanic carried controversy. The ship was rushed into service to beat competitors in prestige rather than speed. Safety compromises were quietly accepted to maintain elegance and profit. Lifeboats were reduced because they would clutter the deck and ruin the visual luxury passengers expected. Regulations allowed this loophole because they were outdated, based on older ships far smaller than Titanic. In other words, the ship was legally safe, but practically dangerous. This decision alone guaranteed that if anything went wrong, thousands of lives would be at risk. It was not an accident. It was a calculated business choice. Even before Titanic left port, strange incidents followed it. During its departure from Southampton, the massive displacement of water nearly pulled a nearby ship, the SS New York, into collision with Titanic. Ropes snapped. Tugboats had to intervene urgently. Some crew members reportedly saw this as a bad omen. Others brushed it off as a harmless coincidence. But seasoned sailors understood what it meant. Titanic was powerful, heavy, and unpredictable. The ship demanded respect. That warning was ignored. As Titanic traveled across the Atlantic, multiple ice warnings were transmitted by nearby ships. These warnings described dangerous ice fields directly in Titanic's path. Some messages were delayed, some were not properly shared with the bridge, and some were treated casually. Captain Edward Smith, an experienced but aging commander on his final voyage before retirement, maintained near maximum speed despite these alerts. Why? Because slowing down would delay arrival and diminish the prestige of White Star Line. The pressure to arrive early outweighed caution. This was not bravery, it was reckless confidence. When the iceberg finally struck late on April 14, 1912, the damage initially seemed minor. Many passengers felt only a gentle vibration. Some continued playing cards. Others went back to sleep. Crew members themselves underestimated the danger. But water was already flooding multiple compartments. Titanic's design could survive 4 flooded compartments, not 5. The iceberg had breached at least 6. The ship was mathematically doomed within minutes of impact. Still, evacuation procedures were delayed. Lifeboats were launched half-empty because officers feared overcrowding would cause panic or structural failure. Hundreds of lives were lost simply because of hesitation and misjudgment. This is where many controversial questions begin. Was the crew properly trained? Why were binoculars missing from the lookout post? Why was the ship traveling at near full speed in an ice field? Why were lifeboat drills canceled earlier that day? Why were third-class passengers delayed from reaching upper decks due to confusing corridor layouts and locked gates designed for immigration control? These were not acts of nature. They were human systems failing under pressure. Some historians argue that certain deaths aboard Titanic could be classified as indirect criminal negligence. When leaders knowingly ignore warnings, reduce safety equipment, and prioritize luxury over lives, responsibility becomes blurred between accident and accountability. In today's legal standards, several decisions made aboard Titanic could have resulted in criminal charges. Another disturbing layer involves class separation. First-class passengers were guided quickly to lifeboats, while many third-class families struggled to find exits. Language barriers, locked passageways, and confusing layouts trapped people below deck longer than necessary. Survival statistics clearly show that wealth increased chances of survival dramatically. This was not coincidence. It was structural inequality built into the ship's design and emergency response. There were also mysterious individual deaths. Some crew members reportedly died under unclear circumstances during the evacuation chaos. Accounts vary, and documentation from that era was inconsistent. Survivors gave conflicting testimonies about who did what during the final minutes. Panic distorts memory, but it also hides truth. Investigations after the disaster were rushed and politically influenced. Shipping companies wanted to minimize blame. Governments wanted to avoid economic consequences. Certain questions were never fully answered. Even the wreck itself, discovered decades later in 1985, raised more questions than answers. The breakup pattern, debris field, and structural damage challenged earlier official narratives about how Titanic sank. Some theories suggest the ship broke apart earlier than initially reported. Others point to material weaknesses in the steel used during construction, possibly due to cold weather brittleness. These technical flaws were not fully acknowledged at the time because it would have damaged the reputation of major shipbuilders. There are also darker conspiracy theories surrounding Titanic, claims involving insurance fraud, ship swaps, and intentional destruction. While many of these theories lack solid evidence, they persist because official transparency was limited. Human beings naturally fill silence with speculation. When tragedy meets secrecy, suspicion grows. But perhaps the biggest hidden truth of Titanic is this: it was not the iceberg that killed over 1,500 people, it was human arrogance. Overconfidence, cost-cutting, outdated laws, corporate pressure, class division, ignored warnings, and poor crisis management combined into a perfect storm of disaster. Every death that night was preventable under better systems and wiser leadership. Titanic became a global lesson written in cold water and darkness. Maritime laws changed. Lifeboat requirements increased. Radio monitoring became mandatory. Safety drills became standard. But these reforms came only after thousands paid the ultimate price. Progress was purchased with human lives. The ship did not just sink into the Atlantic, it sank into history as a warning to every generation that technology without humility is dangerous, and power without responsibility is deadly. Titanic remains one of the most powerful reminders that nature always humbles human pride. And yet, more questions remain unanswered. What really happened in the final 30 minutes aboard the ship? Were there deliberate cover-ups in the investigation? Could more lives have been saved if leadership acted faster? Were some deaths avoidable moments away from rescue? These are the hidden truths we continue to uncover, layer by layer. The hidden truth of the Titanic ship. The night of confusion, fear, and unanswered questions. As midnight passed on April 14, 1912, the Atlantic Ocean looked calm, almost peaceful. The stars reflected across the black water like scattered diamonds, and the air was dangerously cold. Passengers who stood on deck that night described the sea as flat as glass. Ironically, this calmness made icebergs harder to see because there were no waves breaking against them. The lookouts strained their eyes into the darkness, unaware that they were missing one crucial tool: binoculars. Due to a last-minute officer change before departure, the binoculars were locked away and the key was never transferred. This single oversight may have delayed iceberg detection by precious seconds that could have saved the ship. When the iceberg finally emerged from the darkness, the alarm was sounded and evasive maneuvers were attempted immediately. The helm was turned hard, engines were reversed, and watertight doors began closing. But Titanic was simply moving too fast for its size and turning radius. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side, puncturing multiple compartments below the waterline. It was not a dramatic crash, more like a tearing whisper of metal beneath the hull. Many passengers barely noticed anything unusual. Some even joked about it. This false sense of safety delayed the seriousness of the response. Below deck, however, water began creeping in silently. Engineers saw the rising flood immediately and understood the reality: the ship was doomed. Yet communicating that truth upward took time. Some officers reportedly resisted believing the worst. Human denial is powerful when facing catastrophic consequences. People naturally hope they are wrong. That hope cost minutes, and minutes cost lives. As lifeboats were prepared, chaos slowly emerged. Crew members struggled to organize passengers who did not believe the ship was sinking. Some refused to leave warm cabins for freezing decks. Others demanded explanations. Women were separated from husbands and sons. Families were torn apart in moments that would haunt survivors forever. The emotional trauma of that separation cannot be overstated. Many passengers boarded lifeboats thinking they would return shortly. They did not understand they were saying goodbye forever. One of the most controversial aspects of Titanic's evacuation was the decision to launch lifeboats half empty. Several boats left with available seats because officers feared that overcrowding could cause structural failure or panic. This caution was misguided. Lifeboats were designed to handle full capacity. Later investigations showed that dozens, possibly hundreds, more people could have survived if boats were filled properly. Fear and lack of training created fatal inefficiency. Another disturbing issue involved locked gates and confusing pathways for third-class passengers. While not intentionally cruel, the ship's layout was designed to separate social classes and enforce immigration regulations. In an emergency, this design became deadly. Some passengers could not find their way to the upper decks quickly. Language barriers made instructions difficult to follow. Panic increased as water rose and corridors flooded. Survival statistics clearly show disproportionate loss among lower-class passengers, a tragic reflection of social inequality carried into crisis. Eyewitness accounts from that night often contradict each other. Some survivors reported hearing gunshots, possibly officers attempting to maintain order or prevent panic. Others denied hearing any such sounds. Some claimed that certain officers behaved heroically, others accused them of favoritism or confusion. Trauma affects memory, and darkness distorted perception. Yet these conflicting testimonies left investigators struggling to establish a clear timeline of events. Nearby ships add another layer of mystery. The SS Californian was reportedly within visible distance of Titanic that night. Crew members on both ships saw lights in the distance, but miscommunication and misinterpretation prevented immediate rescue action. The Californian's wireless operator had gone off duty, missing Titanic's distress signals. Rockets fired by Titanic were seen but not properly recognized as distress flares. Had communication protocols been clearer, rescue might have arrived sooner, potentially saving hundreds more lives from freezing waters. When RMS Carpathia finally arrived, it rescued survivors from lifeboats but found nothing but silence where Titanic once floated. Over 1,500 people had perished. The ocean swallowed their voices, stories, and unanswered questions. Survivors carried guilt, trauma, and fragmented memories for the rest of their lives. Some avoided speaking about the event entirely. Others wrote memoirs filled with emotional scars. Investigations that followed were rushed and politically influenced. Shipping companies faced enormous financial and reputational risk. Governments wanted stability, not scandal. Testimonies were filtered. Responsibility was distributed thinly rather than focused sharply. While safety reforms were implemented, deeper accountability was softened. This creates a lingering question. When massive loss of life occurs due to negligence, miscommunication, and ignored warnings, where does responsibility truly lie? Is it an accident, or a chain of preventable failures? Titanic's tragedy was not only physical, it was systemic. Systems failed. Communication systems, safety systems, training systems, social systems. When systems collapse simultaneously, tragedy becomes inevitable. The hidden truth of the Titanic ship. The theories, the cover-ups, and the questions that refuse to die. More than a century after Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic, people are still arguing about what truly happened that night. Official reports say it was a tragic accident caused by an iceberg, poor visibility, and insufficient lifeboats. But many researchers, engineers, and historians believe that explanation is incomplete. When the wreck was discovered in 1985, physical evidence challenged parts of the original narrative. The ship was found split into two massive sections scattered across the ocean floor, with debris spread over a wide area. This contradicted early testimonies that claimed Titanic sank intact. Why was this detail dismissed for decades? Some survivors insisted the ship broke apart on the surface, but their accounts were reportedly minimized during investigations, possibly to avoid public panic or legal consequences for shipbuilders. Material analysis of Titanic's steel revealed that the metal contained higher levels of brittleness compared to modern standards, especially in cold temperatures. At near-freezing ocean temperatures, The steel may have fractured more easily upon impact with the iceberg, allowing damage to spread across multiple compartments. Rivets used during construction were also questioned. Some were made of lower-grade iron due to material shortages at the time. This does not mean the ship was poorly built by early 1900s standards, but it suggests the limits of industrial knowledge were underestimated. These weaknesses became fatal in extreme conditions. Another theory revolves around fire. Some researchers argue that a coal bunker fire may have been burning inside the ship for days before departure. Photographs taken before sailing show dark marks on the hull near where the iceberg struck. If true, prolonged heat could have weakened the steel in that area, making it more vulnerable to rupture upon impact. The fire theory is controversial but supported by testimonies from crew members who acknowledged battling a persistent coal fire. If company officials knew this and still allowed the ship to sail at full capacity, that raises serious ethical concerns. Then comes the insurance theory, one of the most controversial. Some claim Titanic was switched with its damaged sister ship, the Olympic, as part of an insurance scheme. According to this theory, the Olympic had been involved in prior accidents and was financially burdensome. The claim suggests Titanic was intentionally sacrificed to collect insurance money. However, most mainstream historians dismiss this theory due to lack of concrete evidence and logistical impracticalities. Still, the theory persists because documentation from the era is incomplete and corporate transparency was limited. There is also the question of why the ship maintained high speed despite ice warnings. Some argue that pressure from investors and prestige competition encouraged faster travel. Being the fastest and most luxurious ship was a powerful marketing strategy. Slowing down would have reduced headlines and bragging rights. In this sense, economic ambition may have indirectly contributed to loss of life. Rescue failures remain deeply troubling. The nearby Californian could have potentially reached Titanic sooner if communication systems were properly maintained. Wireless operators at the time were not required to operate continuously. This outdated regulation cost precious hours. Additionally, rockets fired by Titanic were not universally recognized as distress signals because international signaling standards were inconsistent. A tragic mismatch of assumptions prevented faster response. Even survivor testimonies contain unsettling contradictions. Some witnesses described overcrowded lifeboats struggling in darkness, while others reported empty seats drifting away. Some recalled officers maintaining calm discipline, while others described frantic disorder. These inconsistencies fuel speculation about what truly happened in the final moments. Another uncomfortable truth is how class influenced survival and historical memory. First-class survivors were more likely to publish memoirs, be interviewed by journalists, and shape the narrative. Third-class victims, many of whom were immigrants, left fewer written records. Their stories faded into statistics rather than voices. History was partially written by those who survived, and those who had platforms. The discovery of personal belongings scattered across the seabed, shoes, luggage, household items, silently confirms the scale of human loss. Each object represents a life interrupted. The wreck is now treated as a memorial site, protected from exploitation, but curiosity continues to drive exploration. Perhaps the most haunting truth is that Titanic was not a single mistake. It was a chain of human overconfidence, outdated regulation, business pressure, engineering limitations, and social inequality converging at the worst possible moment. Disaster was not inevitable, but vulnerability was built into the system. The hidden truth of the Titanic ship. The stories that shouldn't have happened. Beyond steel, ice, and statistics, Titanic was made of human lives. Dreams packed into suitcases, letters never delivered, futures waiting on distant shores. Among the survivors were stories so strange that historians still struggle to explain them. These are not myths or movie scenes. They are documented moments of coincidence, instinct, and fate that shaped who lived and who didn't. One of the most chilling coincidences involves passengers who canceled their tickets at the last minute. Several wealthy individuals withdrew from the voyage due to minor schedule changes, sudden illnesses, or unexplained unease. Some later admitted they felt something was off about the journey but couldn't logically explain why. While hindsight naturally magnifies intuition, the sheer number of last-minute cancellations has fueled speculation for decades. Were these simply coincidences, or subconscious instincts sensing danger? Another strange detail involves people who boarded lifeboats by chance rather than instruction. Some passengers wandered onto deck at the right moment, overheard conversations, or followed strangers who unknowingly guided them toward safety. Small decisions, stepping outside for fresh air, checking on a friend, or curiosity about the disturbance, determined survival. Meanwhile, others delayed for simple reasons like packing belongings or waiting for confirmation. Those few minutes often became the difference between life and death. There were also heartbreaking cases of families separated in the confusion. Some parents placed children into boats believing they would reunite shortly, only to never see them again. Survivors carried emotional scars for the rest of their lives. Many never spoke publicly about their final moments with loved ones. Silence became their way of coping. Some passengers displayed extraordinary calm and generosity. There are verified accounts of individuals helping strangers into boats, giving up seats, or guiding frightened passengers. These acts of quiet courage rarely make headlines but define the human side of the tragedy. In the face of fear, some chose compassion over survival instinct. Equally haunting are stories of missed survival by seconds. Some passengers reached the lifeboats only to find them lowering away. Others hesitated out of politeness or disbelief. Human psychology works against urgency when danger is unfamiliar. Many simply could not mentally process that a massive ship could truly sink. Denial delayed action. There were survivors who later questioned why they lived while others didn't. This phenomenon, now known as survivor's guilt, haunted many passengers for decades. Nightmares, anxiety, and emotional withdrawal followed them long after rescue. Titanic did not end when the ship disappeared. It lived inside those who escaped. Even the band's final performance has become legendary. Musicians reportedly continued playing to maintain calm and prevent panic. Whether their last song was a hymn or popular tune remains debated, but their commitment to duty symbolized dignity amid chaos. Their sacrifice reminds us that courage sometimes appears quietly, not loudly. Some lifeboats returned to search for survivors in the water after the ship sank, while others did not due to fear of being overwhelmed. This decision remains ethically debated. Time was critical, and hypothermia claimed lives quickly. Rescue hesitation cost unknown numbers of lives. Years later, survivors' testimonies revealed subtle contradictions and emotional gaps. Trauma reshapes memory. People recall fragments, sounds, cold voices, but lose sequence. This makes historical reconstruction difficult and fuels lingering mystery. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is how randomness governed survival. Wealth helped, timing mattered, location mattered, but chance dominated. A step left instead of right. A conversation overheard. A door opened or closed. Titanic reminds humanity how fragile control truly is. The hidden truth of the Titanic ship. The legacy, the lessons, and why Titanic still haunts humanity. When the last lifeboat was pulled aboard the RMS Carpathia and the sun rose over the empty Atlantic, the world had no idea what had just happened. News traveled slowly in 1912. At first, newspapers mistakenly reported that Titanic was being safely towed to port. Families celebrated prematurely. Hope spread across cities and towns. Then the truth arrived like a thunderclap. Titanic was gone, and more than 1,500 lives had vanished with it. Shock rippled across nations. Flags lowered. Churches filled. Entire communities mourned people they would never see again. The emotional impact was enormous because Titanic represented more than transportation. It symbolized human progress, industrial power, and confidence in technology. When it failed, it shattered the illusion that modern engineering had conquered nature. Humanity was reminded that progress without humility carries consequences. Public outrage forced governments into action. Maritime safety laws changed permanently. Lifeboat requirements were updated to match passenger capacity, not outdated ship weight categories. Continuous radio monitoring became mandatory so distress signals could never again go unanswered. International ice patrol systems were established to track dangerous ice fields and warn ships in real time. Crew training standards improved. Emergency drills became compulsory. These reforms saved countless lives in later decades. Titanic became the painful teacher of global safety culture. Yet legal accountability remained limited. White Star Line avoided massive punishment. Individuals were not criminally prosecuted. Responsibility dissolved into committees and policy reforms rather than personal consequence. This left many families feeling justice was incomplete. It also reinforced a dangerous precedent. Corporations could absorb tragedy without full accountability if the loss was framed as an accident rather than negligence. Titanic also reshaped disaster psychology. Researchers began studying panic behavior, crowd dynamics, leadership under stress, and trauma recovery. Survivors became early examples of long-term psychological impact after catastrophe. These studies later influenced emergency management systems worldwide. Culturally, Titanic became immortal. Books, documentaries, songs, films, and conspiracy theories multiplied. Each generation retold the story through its own lens: romance, heroism, tragedy, mystery, greed, class struggle, technological arrogance. Titanic became a mirror reflecting whatever humanity wanted to examine about itself. The wreck itself now rests silently on the ocean floor as a memorial site. Corrosion slowly consumes the metal. Bacteria eat away at steel. Time continues its quiet work. Eventually, Titanic will collapse completely into sediment. Physical evidence will disappear, leaving only memory and recorded history behind. Perhaps the most important lesson Titanic offers is that disasters rarely come from one single mistake. They come from layers of small compromises, ignored warnings, delayed decisions, economic pressure, and human ego stacking quietly until collapse becomes inevitable. When systems fail together, catastrophe emerges. Titanic also reminds us that inequality becomes deadly during emergencies. Who has access, information, mobility, and authority matters. Crisis exposes the invisible structures of society. The fascination with Titanic persists because it is not just history, it is human nature frozen in a moment of consequence. Ambition, hope, fear, love, pride, sacrifice, all collided on one cold night. And the hidden truth is this: Titanic did not teach humanity everything. We still repeat similar patterns: overconfidence in technology, shortcuts for profit, delayed safety investments, weak accountability, and belief that it won't happen to us. Titanic remains relevant because we still struggle to learn its deepest lesson. The ship may rest beneath miles of water, but its warning floats forever in human memory.